Well, the course description for this course, which I've decided to take seriously, despite my usual practice, because it asks such good questions. What are we? What can we know? And what can we hope for? Those are wonderful questions. And why not base a whole course on them? I applaud whoever wrote that course description. And we'll take those questions. Those are loose questions, but we'll take them, as I said in my introduction, we'll take them seriously. And we'll move from one to another freely in a completely unsystematic way. How about that? Yes. Week one, two wonderful texts. The Bhagavad-Gita from the great Indian tradition, and Plato's Apology, which is not Plato's apologizing, nor is it even Socrates apologizing, but it's Socrates' defense speech, his apologia, when he's accused, as you'll see, of certain crimes against the city of Athens. Two very different texts from two different traditions. The Vedic Indian or Hindu tradition, I don't know what the proper way to describe that tradition of the ancient culture of India, was way ahead, way ahead of the Greeks. By the time the Bhagavad Gita was written, which was about, well, actually, I think it was written after. In any case, the Greeks were really just emerging, as you might call it, a high civilization by the time the Hindu civilization, its philosophy, its religion, its societal structures had already been developing for centuries and centuries. So the Bhagavad Gita, in terms of looked at from the perspective of a philosophy person, it was just way ahead. Plato is a genius in developing his philosophy, but it took a genius under those conditions. The Bhagavad Gita is a document of an advanced civilization, an advanced culture. But the two very different texts, but they do connect up with our questions. And I would say, all of the questions are always there. Right? Questions are connected. So to focus on one of them is kind of artificial, but it does seem that certain texts emphasize certain questions. And I suppose the question that I'd like you to focus on or keep in mind as you read these texts is the what am I or what are we question. Because I think that the texts are particularly good in providing a kind of proposal, kind of answer to that question. As we'll see, the Bhagavad Gita and the Apology are also interesting philosophical texts in that they are set within a very dramatic context, which is not really very usual in philosophy. Philosophy is usually philosophers writing down their thoughts on a particular subject. The Bhagavad Gita is part of a larger cycle of poems, and this one, although it's mostly Krishna talking to Arjuna, emerges out of a real specific dramatic situation, the beginning of a battle, and the questions that a great soldier has about the validity of fighting in that battle. While the Apology is a very real thing in that it is a concrete situation in which this man, Socrates, has been accused of crimes against the state, crimes that are punishable in all sorts of ways, including death. And in the fashion of ancient Greece, he has to stand up and defend himself. There's no lawyers involved. His accusers, who are also private citizens, have just made a case against him that he's a criminal. And this old man has to stand up in front of the 500 jurors and defend himself against these charges. So they're different texts and interesting in those respects, in that they're highly dramatic background out of which the thinking emerges. And they're different, of course, very, very different. But the reason I gave them to you for this week, this beginning of the course, is first of all, because you should read them, because they're great. And no one who is getting an education should miss the reading of great texts like these. But the reason I'm giving you specifically is because in answering the questions or in responding to the dramatic situation, Krishna, the God, in the Bhagavad-Gita, and Socrates, the mere man, as he emphasizes, the man who could only be said to have human wisdom. In answering these questions and responding to these charges, they paint a certain picture of the human condition. They paint a certain picture of what it means to be a human being, and therefore what should be kept in mind, right? How you're supposed to live with this knowledge of who you are. So I think that, again, every text that we read is so rich in especially these early classics in what they have to say about things, that they can be read in all sorts of different ways. But I think that the question or the theme to keep in mind this week is, what are we?